I had all these ideas to come in today and do calf raises, seated calf raises, and a whole bunch of 45 hypers. Walked over to the bar and I spent about 15 minutes just messing with it. Feeling really not mobile today, but I thought, okay, let's see what the body's offering. What the body was offering was okay squatting in a wide stance. I took that. I was like, okay, no worries, I'll take the wide stance squats. I ended up doing like 5 sets with the bar, went to 60 kilos, did another 5 sets, went to 100 kilos, did another set. I've recently done wide stance squats. This time around, for whatever reason, I feel better in wide stance squats. I feel like I have better mobility. I think all the troubles in the last week or so, since I've started running and all that, I've also started stretching, especially the adductors, the groin, whatnot, hip flexors, and I feel like that's contributed to this feeling of feeling not too bad in the wide stance squats. So I ended up doing a whole bunch of sets with them before I went to the front squats. And surprisingly, the front squats felt better. Still, I'm leaning over like a madman. Still, it looks like a low bar front squat. It is revolting for me to see. I can barely look at the damn freaking video. Not happy with how it looks at all. However, I felt better, as weird as that sounds. I was leaning over yesterday. I was leaning over the day before. Today I'm also leaning over. However, I feel like the groin, the hip flexors, the adductors were a little bit more happy and warmed up. And that feeling carried over to a better squatting day. I ended up hitting 170 kilos in the front squat. As the weight started, piling on, I started becoming more and more upright. That was kind of cool to see and feel. Hit 170 and then I decided to do a reverse pyramid back down. So 160 I did for 2, 150 for 3, 140 for 4, 130 for 5, and then 100 kilos for a set of 10. And so ultimately I did a whole lot of squatting. And then after all the front squatting, I went back to the wide stance squats. I ended up doing, I think, 80 kilos. It was 80 kilos for like another 3 sets of 10. So I ended up having a massive session with the squats purely because I walked in and I was like, okay, what are you offering me today? And I think that's a really important question to ask myself, and I guess you can ask yourself if you are training, auto regulation type of by feel, especially if you're training every day. Walk in and ask yourself the question, what are you offering me today? As in, you're talking to your body. My body wasn't having any narrow stance squats at the moment I walked in, but wide stance squats, I feel like anyone and everyone can do it the moment they walk in. It's the least mobility requirement movement in terms of the squatting. It kind of reminded me a bit about, what do you call them? Not Zercher, when you're holding the kettlebell in your hands, goblet squats. I feel like, that weight in your hand is counterbalancing all of the bad mobility that you have, and you can almost kind of squat perfectly regardless of the day. That's kind of how I felt with the wide stance squats. They were allowing me to warm up the squatting movement without me banging my head against the wall of the calves and the bad mobility, especially after a day like yesterday where I've push the deadlifts quite hard. What are you offering me today? And I feel like that is a really nice way to kind of warm yourself up, especially if you're, squatting in, with bad mobility. In my case, I'm using the shoes that I'm using. They're troubling me. Walk in, do freaking Westside style squat. If that's the first set of squats that you have to do that, and then slowly work your way in. So I was kind of quite happy with my approach today, because I kind of eased into the mobility. Very, very specific movement. Obviously, I'm not rolling around in foams and foam rollers and whatever. I'm not stretching. I just come in and I just start with a really wide stance and I slowly kind of work my way in. That's kind of what I was thinking. But as you are squatting and in a wide stance, you're warming up the glutes, the hip flexors, the adductors, all of the muscles you're going to be using anyway in the narrow stance. So it's kind of like the narrow stance is a much higher requirement of mobility. So jumping straight into that is a tall task unless you are very advanced in mobility, or you wearing Olympic weightlifting shoes, or you have nice leverages or whatever. You might be able to come in right away, and even on bad days, and just do a perfect ATG front squat. That's cool. But for the rest of us, if you're coming in and you're like, man, I feel really jacked up, start wider. This is something that I catch myself being stubborn about. No, I need to squat like this. I've been like that for a very long time, but now I'm coming to I've kind of realized today, it's like, okay, you know, maybe not every day is going to be a narrow stance squat. And, you know, I have been hitting my head against the wall. No, I will do that, and I will do that. And for the last 3 days, I've had really crappy squat sessions. Like basically working up to 160 front squat, no volume whatsoever in the back off because I'm not feeling well. But I wonder, you know, if I had this mentality that I have right now today, I could have done some wide stance squats and gotten that volume through that. You know, you can always get the volume. You know, sometimes I have this self-dialogue with myself. It's like, why am I so freaking stubborn in some of these thoughts? I want to squat every day. You know, that's not even a stubborn thing. That's just what I want to do. That's what excites me. That's what keeps me coming back and all the rest of it. So I don't need to question that. You know, I'm happy doing that. What I'm unhappy is finding bad mobility. You know, it's trying to stick my head through a freaking brick wall. Take what's being offered. Wide stance squats are always going to be the low-lying fruit. Just freaking grab that. Grab that, and then, you know, as the sets progress, maybe you can kind of work towards something that's more optimal in your eyes. I walked away from today exhausted. You know, really nice squat session, lots of volume. Walked out feeling satisfied, satiated. I felt like I was it was a really good day. Whereas in contrast, if I stuck with my stubborn ways and I came in and started squatting, you know, with my stance that I usually squat, and I'm, you know, messed up, the ankles are jacked up, everything's jacked up, you know, that's not a happy Ivan. You know, squatting in that type of state is not, it's not fun, it's not producing the right training stimulus, it's not doing anything, right? So I think this is what I'll do as I'm kind of working myself through this tough period of acclimatization to the ankles, to the shoes, to whatever, the running. You know, I ran 500 meters at 9 kilometers per hour on the treadmill, 500, that was my warm-up. Walked down, got into the wide stance squats, front squats, back to wide stance squats. And then I finished off the workout with another 500 meter run at 9 Ks an hour. And I'm feeling a bit more comfortable now with running. You know, the feet are not as problematic as they initially were. So I feel like there's some sort of gains happening there. I'm pushing up the speed to 9 kilometers an hour. That, you know, that's a pretty fast run for me. Huffing and puffing a fair bit, you know. So I'm quite happy, really, really happy with the day. And it's all based upon this idea of, what can I take from you today? What are you offering? I'm not going to dictate. I'm not going to pre-plan what the body's going to be offering me. What is the mobility score out of 10 going to be? You know, in the last few freaking days, it's been like a 1 or a 2, you know, like really, really poor mobility. And as a result, the front squatting has been terrible. I've been working up to 160. Those reps have felt horrible. And as a result, no volume. So I'm basically kind of like not even providing any training stimulus that's worthy in my mind. You know, I'm just kind of practicing the technique, even the technique is freaking bad. It's a bad motor neuron pattern to practice. Today I've come in, okay, let's warm up with whatever's happening. And, you know, moving forward, I'm thinking to myself, man, like no matter what is happening, she can always freaking squat really wide into parallel, man. I mean, that is, man, I don't care who you grab off the street, everyone can do that. What everyone can't do is the really narrow ATG squat. That is the difficulty, and this is what maybe a lot of people around the world were like, well, I can't squat like that, and so I can't squat. I'm going to skip leg day. But what if they change that mentality to, okay, I'm going to come in and squat however I can, you know, still having some sort of fundamental understanding of what the squat is. So you don't want your knee to kind of collapse in. You don't want knee valgus. You don't want to round it back. Like there needs to be some sort of, you know, form in mind. You don't want to freaking squat like trash, you know. But I feel like I can do that every day. And the funniest thing about all of this is I've spoken to a couple of you guys, during the last video. No, not the last video. I actually went back to previous videos, probably like 40 days ago or something, when I was doing the wide stance squats, and I saw some comments that were not answered by me, and I started answering those, some of those comments. And you know, the funny thing about wide stance squats, as Louis, you know, Simmons alluded to many times, is that wide stance squatters can squat narrow and be strong, but the opposite is not true. If you are a narrow stance squatter and you go wide, you're going to be exposed. You're not going to be able to have any carryover to that stance. But Louis always stressed the importance of wide stance squatting and how wide stance guys can also do narrow, but narrow can't do wide. Also reminds me what Ed Coleman used to talk about, how he used to, pull conventional during training. Make sure you do both. Whatever your main is, spend a lot of time doing the other one in terms of sumo versus conventional. As much as I love specificity, there's something to be learned about variation. Exposing some of these weaknesses, which then can be carried over to your primary movement. I'm weak in the wide stance squat in comparison to what I can do with the narrow. I'm weak. I feel really shaky. But I'll tell you something, man. All the volume that I did today in the wide, all the wide stance squats I've ever done have never caused me hip pain. In fact, it has almost rehabilitated my hip. Not pain. It's not pain anymore. It's just sometimes I put a lot of volume in narrow and I feel off, right? I feel kind of like achy and whatever. But whenever I put a lot of volume in wide, I walk out and I feel good. I feel open. I feel balanced. I feel my hip flexors are better, less anterior pelvic tilt. Even today in today's video, man, my guts are falling over me, man. Like it's just, my back is so tight from yesterday, from the deadlifts, from the conventional deadlifts. My posture's horrible. I can feel it. But doing these wide stance squats, I feel like I walked out in a better shape than I walked into the gym. I feel like I gave the hip flexors a stretch. I felt like the glutes from a different angle were turned on. I feel like the adductors were also stretched out a little bit, and I feel better. Now, if you're a wide stance squatter, listening to this, you probably have some benefit doing narrow as well. Your strength will carry over better than what mine will carry over the opposite way. But you might need, maybe you're lacking in quads. I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between wide and narrow. But I think there's a different angle, and obviously different big movers are going to be used. A different spread, So maybe in a narrow, it's a little bit more quads and a little bit more glutes of a different strand. And then wide is a lot of adductors, a lot of hip flexors, a lot of the glutes from a different kind of angle. Not sure. But the interesting thing is, when you are doing wide, you are stretching the hell out of the adductors and working them really hard. And I think that's the biggest difference between the two, adductors. And we all know how big this group of muscles are. The Magnus, there's like 3 or 4 other ones, I think. It's a massive muscle group, much bigger than the hamstrings if you look at it on the chart. So neglecting them is a silly idea. So it makes sense to train them. Whether you're training it in a deadlift, like through a sumo or a wide stance squat, it makes sense. And for me, anecdotally speaking, it does make me feel good. It makes me feel better. I dare say it might even fix anterior pelvic tilt, which is a symptom of mine. And I think a lot of guys say to me, anterior pelvic tilt has proven not to be a worry. For me, it is a worry, because when I go into anterior pelvic tilt, I know hip pain is around the corner. I know everything in the anterior compartment of my chain is really locked up, and I feel crap, man. I feel crap. I feel out of position. I don't feel strong. Whenever I do exercises to kind of fix that, be it lots of pulling, so lots of hamstring work, I just end up feeling better. And I think that's the key for me, over the years with the hip pain. Every single time I introduced a lot of pulling, I felt better. Squatting makes anterior pelvic tilt. Pulling reverses it. So this is where the whole ratio I keep talking about, pulling versus pushing in the lower body, this is basically the gist of it. It's about balancing the pelvis, essentially. That's what we're talking about. Appreciate all of you guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out.